Hello, welcome. I'll let your audio get connected. Welcome to our innovation skill session today. Hope we are all doing well. And hopefully you can see your sound getting connected on here. Excellent. So while you're getting connected, my name is Edward and I am Innovation Manager here at RGU. And this is our first enterprise skill session of the academic year. These are opportunities for you to engage with extracurricular activities. Maybe you're running a business already, or maybe you just want to upskill yourself. Maybe you're a staff member or a student and you want to just get that extra opportunity. Well, these sessions are free, lunchtime, easy come along and learn sessions that you are welcome to take part in. And we are delighted today. Our first one kicking off is Josh Bircham from the School of Creative and Cultural Business, all about social media and how you can use social media for businesses. So please, throughout the session, feel free to ask questions. And we are recording, so if you don't want to have your audio or video shown in the recording, then just make sure you pop it in the chat instead, or we'll cut that bit out of the recording as well. So without further ado, we're tight on time for such a big topic. So over to you, Josh, to start the session for today.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Edward. And it's really nice to meet you all. So as was mentioned, my name's Josh Bircham. I'm a lecturer in RGU's School of Creative and Cultural Business. I mainly lecture in digital marketing and analytics, which obviously encompasses a number of different things, including social media. I teach across the postgraduate modules and the undergraduate modules, and I'm also on a short course called Strategic Digital Marketing, which is a really useful little short course that kind of takes you through all of the fundamentals of digital marketing, including a bit about social media there as well. So that's my background here at RGU. Before that, I ran a small agency in Aberdeenshire, and before that, I worked in communications for the European Energy Centre. So it's kind of a background in a kind of digital sphere anyway. I've included my contact details up on the screen there. So if anybody does have any questions following today's session, do feel free to pop me an email. I've also included my LinkedIn there if you want to connect with me. And also it's an Instagram I share with my wife. So if you want to see what I'm eating on a day-to-day basis and that kind of thing, you can also follow me there, but there's absolutely no pressure on that one. So just to take you through what we're going to be discussing today, as Edward mentioned, it is a pretty large topic. So I'm hopefully going to touch on a few different things in a few different areas, but it definitely won't be as in-depth as necessarily it could be in any of these specific areas. But we'll talk about, firstly, why social media is so important and why you should be considering it. We're then going to discuss strategy and planning for social media. We're then going to talk a little bit about content, what content is, how to create good content and how it works. We're then going to discuss some of the different platforms that you can work with and work on. We're then going to talk a little bit about social media tools, some tools that you can use to maybe optimize your flow or potentially plan things a little bit more in advance and so on. And then finally, we'll discuss the importance of measurement, how you can measure your success on social media, why you should measure your success in social media, and then how to maybe build on that success to then develop future campaigns and future success in the social media that you're using. So just to kick things off, why is social media important to be considering, and especially in a business context? Well, firstly, it's going to be where your audience are. There are 3.8 billion users globally. I hate using these kind of massive statistics because they don't necessarily mean so much. You can now just say 3.8 billion and it kind of washes over people, but that is such a massive amount of the world's population contained on these channels which are already optimized to reach them as well. So being on these channels means that you can really increase your brand and product exposure. You can appear in front of more people if you're using social media properly. You can also communicate really clearly with social media, meaning that you can cultivate meaningful relationships with your audiences. Equally, you can receive real-time feedback as well. So if you've got something you're wanting to kind of put out there, you can immediately find out whether your audience likes it, dislikes it, or has any other kind of emotion on the massive spectrum of emotional response that you can get for something that you post. It also offers an instant and positive experience. Unlike traditional press, where there might be a huge lead time for submitting something to a paper, waiting for that to go out, waiting for the reaction, everything on social media is so quick, and that gives you that flexibility to test and experiment, try new things, try things out, and so on. So there are many other reasons why social media is something you should be considering, but those are some top level things that you can think about throughout the rest of the presentation as well. So just to start up, we'll go from the very beginning. So how to kind of set up social media, and especially from a business context here. The first thing that I think is important is having a really clear biography or really clear bio. And in some cases, this is known as about, but typically you'll have heard of it as a bio. And that needs to explain exactly what you're about in a concise way that's suitable to the platform. And we'll talk about platforms a little bit later on in this presentation, but there's no point using a hashtag in your Facebook bio, for example, because hashtags aren't something that's that relevant for that particular platform. So thinking about how to optimize that for the platform, but also being really clear and really concise. Also, making sure that you're consistent across different social media platforms. If you're simultaneously setting up a Facebook, a Twitter, a LinkedIn, and an Instagram, make sure you're using the same logo across all of those, the same sort of profile picture. You've got consistency in the tone in which your bio is written across those different platforms. And you've also got potentially a visual consistency or a consistency in your copy as well. So you've not got your audience split across multiple platforms, but receiving completely different forms of communication from you. You should also be considering a good quality profile picture. And equally, whether that profile picture is displayed as a square or a circle, I've seen multiple times in the past people who have created their profile picture for a social media where it appears in a square, and then just used it across all of their other platforms, and it cuts off half of their logo and you can't see the edge of the writing or the edge of the logo. So definitely think about what your profile picture is going to display like and display as. Seems like a pretty self-explanatory one, but it's really easy to forget when you're setting things up quite quickly. Another thing that's quite a good rule is before you start to actually use your social media strategically is to pre-populate it with a little bit of content. This is especially useful for Instagram because, as I'm sure you know, nobody likes an empty Instagram grid. You're far less likely to follow or engage with an account with one post and a big kind of blank white page underneath it. So getting a few pictures or a few bits of content up before you start really utilizing and using your social media can be really helpful. Make sure you're thinking strategically as well. So when you're putting together the page and when you're putting together the different elements of the page, think about your audience and think about how you're optimizing that for the people you're wanting to reach. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second, but it's also important to consider right from the get-go, right from this setup period. I was just going to quickly show you the consistency of HubSpot as an example. So I'll just start a new share quickly of my browser here. And I'll just run through a few different tabs with HubSpot in it. So as you can see from HubSpot's profile here, we've got quite a clear cover photo that goes with their brand identity and their brand colors with a nice clear statement, nice and short, useful for social media, with good quality logo in a circle, at HubSpot as their URL there, which is important as well, because this is something that people are going to be looking for. And then we've got their description there, which says HubSpot is a leading CRM platform that provides software and support, etc., etc., etc. So quite a long description, but it's a good kind of about us style description there. If we then move on to their Instagram, you'll see we've got a lot shorter in terms of the description. However, it's the same sort of tone in that copy. Equally, they've used a hashtag here because hashtags work on Instagram. It's something that's relevant to that particular platform. You'll also notice that the logo is the same as the one they've got on Facebook. So we've got visual consistency between those two platforms. just to run through the last couple I've got here, we've got Twitter. So on Twitter, again, we've got a similar but slightly longer version of the same description with their partner, kind of sister Twitter account there that you can also click through to. And you've got an optimized cover photo that's been resized for this particular platform. And again, the same logo for visual consistency. And if we move to LinkedIn, you'll see it's again a really similar description, however, without hashtags, as they're not as relevant in descriptions on this particular platform. Again, a different size of cover photo and a squared version of their logo here, because LinkedIn uses square profiles rather than circle. So I'll just hop back to my presentation now. There we go. So we're now going to talk a little bit about strategic social media. I mentioned that word previously, but it's important to note that social media isn't actually a marketing strategy in itself. Social media is a tactic which you can build into a marketing strategy. So social media shouldn't be the first thing you go to. You should consider where your audience are and where it's best to get in touch with them and communicate with them. And if the answer to that is social media, you can absolutely build and design your whole marketing strategy around social media, but remembering the strategy itself is separate to the tactics that you use. You can obviously design a campaign on social media with a specific marketing purpose, and that would be a social media campaign. So for example, if you're wanting to get new followers or bring in new audience from Facebook, you could design a social media campaign for Facebook that does just that. You should also, though, consider where social media fits into your target audience's journey. Now, your target audience is something that I will be mentioning quite a few times throughout this presentation because it is so important to consider. But their journey will follow a specific path. And whether that goes from social media to your website to purchase and then back to social media to talk to you and communicate with you in the future, or potentially a completely different journey, you should be considering that. Typically, but not always, as I've got up on the slide here, social media will fit into your customer journey near the beginning. So at those first two stages in that funnel diagram on the right, the awareness stage and the interest stage. So the awareness stage, making new customers or new audiences aware of what you do and actually giving them that first introduction to who you are. Then the interest stage, which is all about that first kind of engagement of those audiences that you've found and making them interact with who you are, experience a bit more about who you are and what you have to offer. And social media fits really neatly into those two parts of the customer journey. That's not to say those are the only parts of the customer journey you can use social media. Some people go the whole way from beginning to end in their customer journey in social media and will actually convert within the selling options that different social media platforms offer. That's fine, but it's all about deciding what works in the context of your business or your goals and objectives. So we've already talked a little bit about audience, but just to really speak about that in a little bit more detail, you should really be thinking strategically about your audience. So who your audience are is really important to consider. Who those audience are in terms of demographics, their age group, their average gender, interests, and so on, and also their personality. So how they'll react to certain things that you post will make a difference to what you post and when as well. Where are they engaged? Which platforms do you think they're most engaged on and what times? And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through this presentation too. Have a think about what they're looking at. So what do they like? Do they prefer long form content, loads of writing? Do they prefer short form content, quick, snappy bursts of copy, potentially with hashtags? Do they like images? Are they visually engaged more than they are with text? Maybe they like video as well. And that's absolutely something that you should be considering nowadays. And we'll talk about that a bit later as well. Why would they look at your content is also important. It's all very well putting content out there, but you need to be considering what value your content is bringing your audience. And typically in digital marketing, we try to fit content into one of three categories, whether it delights your audience, informs your audience, or entertains your audience. And those three methods are a good way of gauging whether your content is actually going to be bringing value to your audience. There's no point posting content for content's sake, because in the end, that will just take up your time and not potentially give you anything back. So we'll talk a little bit about planning now as well. Planning is important when it comes to social media. And as a good rule, you should consider content calendars. I've got an example of a content calendar on the next page, and we'll talk a bit more about that when we get to it. A good rule is the 80-20 spontaneity rule. So this says that you should have 80% of your content planned in advance versus a planned spontaneous 20%. So anticipate putting out 20% spontaneous content based on things that are potentially happening in the world, things that are happening in your business or in your organization, or on a day-to-day basis on the fly. Spontaneous content, actually, a lot of companies can sometimes find that they produce the biggest results. An example, quite an old example now, actually, is the 2013 Oreos Dunk in the Dark tweet that they put out in the middle of the Super Bowl in 2013. There was a massive power outage in the stadium, and Oreo almost within seconds managed to put out a tweet with a picture of an Oreo in the dark with a "you can still dunk in the dark," alongside the Twitter traction that the actual event was getting. That tweet then massively spiked, and they found it was one of their most successful tweets of the year. And that's how you can quite successfully leverage spontaneous content based on things that are going on, being reactive and agile when it comes to spontaneous content, because you've already got the basis of all of that planned content as well. We'll talk a little bit more about posting times, but it is important to think about the best times of the day to post based on your audience. Don't overthink this. It's not too complicated. Just have a think about who your audience are and maybe when they're at work or when they're likely to be on their phones. Are they, for example, going to be taking lunch breaks around the time that you'd expect somebody to take a lunch break? So potentially between 12 and 2. Are they going to be commuting? Maybe they'll be checking their social media when they're commuting. Or is it more of a professional social media you're contacting them on? LinkedIn, for example. Maybe LinkedIn would be good to be putting somewhere near the end of the day when they're getting fatigued from normal work and moving on to the kind of social media that's connected to work, but potentially a little bit more relaxing. Think like them and don't get too bogged down in posting times. Before, I've had people saying like, oh, well, I shouldn't be posting now. It's 2 p.m. on a Thursday, and that's not optimum. I've read blogs that say that's not the optimum time. Like, that doesn't always matter. It should be based on how your particular audience respond. And also think about the fact that algorithms will serve posts at different times. And we'll talk about algorithms a little bit later on. But if you post at 2, it's not necessarily going to be broadcast to all of your audience at 2 exactly. You should also experiment. So optimization and getting the ideal posting times is also all about trial and error as well. So if you find that some things are working, try something else maybe for a change and see whether that works better or worse. And if it does work better, then potentially shift things to that time and then experiment with something else. The more you experiment, the more you'll find out what works with your particular audience. So the content calendar I was mentioning, I've got an example up on the screen here, and this is a very basic one that's been put together in Excel, but it's just as simple as having a think about what you're going to be putting out through a month, through a year, and what sort of content is going to be put out on what particular channel as well. And that's the kind of planning that can be really helpful. You can also schedule posts in advance as well using specific tools, and we'll talk about those a little bit later on also. So just to move on to content more generally. Now, we've been talking a bit about content broadly, but content specifically should tell a story. So you should be considering narrative, even down to your smaller image-focused posts. Think about the narrative that that image might be telling your audience. You can also copy other people's good ideas. Have a look at what other people are doing and add your own twist to it. Have a look at what your competitor's doing and add your own twist to that as well. It's absolutely fine to copy if you're using those ideas in a way that works with your particular business. With content, understanding of the platform is really key as well. And we'll come on to this in a second when we're talking through the different social media platforms. You should be thinking about relevance too. So again, are you planning to delight, inform, or entertain your audience with your content? Because in some way, your content does need to be relevant to your audience. It needs to connect to them in some way. You also need to want to decide if your audience is going to be taking another action off your audience. If so, you're going to want a call to action or a CTA. And that's a phrase or a statement which basically tells them what to do next. Do you want them to click through somewhere else? Do you want them to buy now? Do you want them to find out more? These phrases are really powerful because they'll actively engage your audience's brains into thinking about what their next step off the back of this content they've enjoyed is. People don't naturally just take a next step unless they're very, very invested. However, if they see a statement which is instructing them what to do, they're far more likely to then take that next step. This is particularly important in paid advertising on social media, which we'll discuss shortly as well. Branding is also something you need to consider. So as well as planning to your audience, you also may have to plan content to a brand. And different brands can have different voices or tone on social media as well. So think about the difference between, I've gone for an extreme example here of the differences between Scott Gov and Innocent Smoothies. Both of them are on social media. Both of them appear side by side on platforms. However, the voice that they have and the tone that they use is very, very different. Of course, your organizations or your businesses might sit somewhere in the scale between Scott Gov and Innocent Smoothies. You do need to think about your brand voice and your brand tone. And again, keeping that consistent and correct for your audience. So I've mentioned advertising already, and there's so much we could say about advertising, but for the sake of this presentation, I'm going to keep things quite concise. Again, social media advertising is all about knowing your audience. So knowing what your audience will engage with and will want to see. And it's all about that action you want your users to take. What are you paying for? Because really, you should be considering that from the outset, what your actual goal is with the paid advertising that you're taking. It's really easy with social media to fall into things like boosts and adding on more followers, because naturally social media will push you towards these types of paid adverts because they make them the most money. It's easiest to get engagement on posts for social media. So naturally they'll push you towards boosts and follower adverts. But think about what those are actually bringing you as an organization. If all you're wanting to do is to bring in new audiences, regardless of the demographic, then of course it's fine to use something like this. However, if your goal is actually to be selling a product or selling an event, have a think about a more specific, more targeted advert with a call to action that potentially says something like buy now or find out more. You should also think about that call to action, because if you're paying per every click on that call to action button, which some social media advertising involves, you want to be paying for clicks, which again fulfill your goal. If your call to action says find out more and you're paying for every click, but really what you're wanting them to do is to pay for a product when they get to the site, you may have a massive drop off because people are wanting to find out more. They might not be ready to commit to an actual payment. If the call to action says buy now, you'll know that everybody, well, almost everybody who clicks on that button is coming with some level of intent to buy now. So you're more likely to get more of a return on investment on your original social media outlay than you would if it was a call to action that was slightly more vague and slightly more about kind of interest and awareness. So we've talked a little bit about posting times, but it is something that is important to consider anyway when you're thinking about planning social media. So do think about your audience. We've discussed that already, but think about things that might interrupt your audience. So something that might break up their typical feed at certain times in the day. Also think about the intention of your post. So what is the purpose of what you're posting? Does that suit a particular time or a particular time of the day? If it's something about potentially an event that's happening in an evening, maybe you want to be hitting people at the sort of time when they'd be likely to sign up for that kind of event. If it's a work event, maybe you want to be targeting them in their working day, for example. That's quite a basic example I'm giving you there, but you should be thinking about intention with time as well. Day of the week and time of the day can also be important. I worked for a business a few years ago that focused on training courses, and we would always put out social media posts on Wednesdays around lunchtime, because people were most likely to sign up for training courses at that time, because that's when people had maximum low in terms of job satisfaction. So they were wanting to retrain about that time, we found, every Wednesday. That was through a few years worth of experimentation. We got that time, but we found that it was almost double the engagement on our posts at that time of day on that day of the week. Equally, we had almost no engagement on Fridays when people were kind of shutting down in the office as a B2B business at the time. And we had very low engagement early on Mondays when people were doing other things and checking their emails and kind of basically clearing the backlog of work, probably the work they didn't do on the Friday, to be honest. You do also want to consider whether you want to be the first thing your audience see in the morning. Maybe you want to schedule posts for 6 or 7 a.m. so that they're getting it on the commute and you're the first thing in their feed. Or maybe you want them to come across your post in real time. So be posting it at a time that they are going to be browsing on a certain platform. So I've mentioned platforms a lot, and there are a lot of different social media platforms available today. They're not all going to be ideal for you or your business. And when you're considering social media, you shouldn't just get everything. That's not the right way to go. You don't need to have an Instagram if you're a B2B oil business. You don't need to, and it'll just add on extra added hassle for you when you're having to plan content through the week. However, if you're a local cafe that's got quite a good kind of like aesthetic cake presence, Instagram might be totally perfect, but LinkedIn feels completely redundant for your business in that case. So there's not a need to be on every platform. You should be thinking about platforms as strategically as you think about everything else. So different platforms have different things to expect when you're using them. Facebook, for example, is still the largest social networking platform in the world, so it's still absolutely relevant to consider when we're thinking about social media. And something it's particularly good at is for brands and businesses to build relationships with specific audiences. The audience is now majority mid to older millennials and up. So when you're thinking about Facebook, do think about the demographic that is typically on there. That's not everyone, and there will be loads and loads of exceptions to that rule, but typically we would plan content aimed at mid to older millennials and up. It's great for large-scale reach interactions. So if you're thinking about reaching a large new audience, Facebook's a really good platform for that. And equally, when we're thinking about content and copy, it's still slightly longer form as well. So it's more word-based than other platforms are, but visuals are still really important. So you should be considering photography and videos on Facebook, but your copy is going to be slightly longer than on other platforms. And we'll go into that in a second. Just as as an example of the type of advertising that you get on Facebook, I've got 2 posts up here. We've got the kind of post that might appear natively in your feed on the left. So this is the sort of thing that you'd expect to see while just scrolling down your feed normally. It blends in quite neatly with regular content. However, as you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner, we've got shop now. So that's a call to action. That's what they've paid for. Shop now is a really high intention call to action. So the kinds of people who click on that are most likely to actually be wanting to purchase and shop. It's not just to find out more, for example. However, on the right there, we've got a sponsored post, and a sponsored post is slightly different. It works slightly differently in terms of its ad setup, but it's got a question on it saying, what is Huel Black Edition there? And that to me looks a lot more like kind of a find out more higher up in that funnel, more near the kind of reach and interest stage. Also, because it's a sponsored post, this isn't going to be pay-per-click. This will be pay-per-click with the shop now. So they'll be paying, say, 90p for every person that clicks on that. For the sponsored post, it'll probably be PPM or pay per meal. And meal is 1,000. So you pay per every 1,000 people that interact with that sponsored post. And those are two ways that you can advertise on Facebook. We've also got Instagram. So Instagram is a predominantly visual platform, and it's often used to share moments. I see quite a lot of businesses nowadays put out text posts on Instagram with quite a lot of text on the image. Those tend to perform really poorly, because Instagram's really set up for visuals and not text, and getting around that by putting text on your image stands out quite negatively in the feed. So you should be thinking about photos with connected copy underneath. The audience on Instagram is younger than Facebook. It's typically mid-millennials down. That's not, again, a hard and fast rule. There's obviously loads and loads of outliers, but if you're doing broad paying for adverts, that's the kind of demographic you should consider for Instagram. They're also more likely to be more on mobile as well. So you should be tailoring your stuff for quick on-the-go interaction. The desktop app for Instagram is pretty much not used. So it's very, very likely they'll be seeing it on their phone. There's also different formats that you can play about with on Instagram, and the formats are more distinct than on somewhere like Facebook. The typical formats at the moment are posts, which are just on your square grid, as you'd see just a standard picture. Reels, now these are short form videos. They're more like TikTok, but I'll talk about that in a second as well. And also stories. So stories are in the moment, videos or photos which disappear after a specified amount of time and are connected to your profile. So you can click through stories and they'll usually be consistently updated. A useful thing about Instagram is that advertising can be done through Facebook to supplement campaigns with younger demographics as well. So if you're setting up Facebook advertising, but actually you think there's not going to be much of an engagement with the younger demographic, you can also set up Instagram advertising simultaneously, because it's all done through the Facebook Ad Manager. There's a few different tones that you can take with communication on Instagram, but typically your tone should be personal, positive, and aspirational. That fits the platform best, and it'll not stand out as being something that's incorrect against other posts you'll see in your feed. Another quick point that I haven't got on here is you can use hashtags in Instagram as well. So if you want to quickly align your content with other similar content, have a look, do a bit of research into what hashtags are relevant and what works in the context of what you're doing, and add those to your posts as well. And there's an example of Instagram advertising. I think Instagram advertising is very native, to the point where I quite often click on things not realizing it's necessarily an ad. This one on the left is one for Jura Whiskey. It does actually have text on the post, which isn't ideal. However, it's not very much text. And you can see there's quite an aspirational aspect to the picture there as well. It's outdoors. It's got a nice depth of field. So it's got that photography element in it too that you see a lot on Instagram. And it fits quite neatly into the feed. There's another example there on the right of a sponsored post. The one on the left has a call to action, which I think I've cut off on that screenshot, I'm afraid, but the one on the right also has a call to action there that says shop now. So again, that's looking at an intention-based click through there. They'll be paying for every click they get on that shop now call to action. So moving on, we've got Twitter. So Twitter is a short form social network and is mainly text driven. So although you can post photos and videos, text is the majority, and text will be what people kind of expect on a day-to-day post on Twitter. It's conversational in nature due to its fast-paced real-time timeline. So you should be considering how you maybe can use Twitter in a spontaneous fashion. Hashtags help users discover content on Twitter, like on Instagram, but in Twitter, they, I would say, are far more standard, and they've kind of been on Twitter since the start. It's really good for real-time participation in cultural moments for a business or an organization, and it's also great for PR. So customer service, interacting with your customers, company news and broadcasting, and also product updates and product launches and stuff like that all fits really neatly onto Twitter. I've got an example of some Twitter advertising for you there as well. So on the left, we've got a post from Naked Wines UK. It's a link click through, so there's not as clear a call to action there. However, they've got, I guess, the offer is what they're kind of using to try and entice you. Equally on the right, we've got a promoted follow, which you can also do on Twitter. So it's Huawei, and they've promoted themselves as a company to follow in that context. So that's something you could consider as well if building an audience is really important to you. Now we'll quickly move on to TikTok. So TikTok's an emerging social media, and I would argue it's probably emerged now as well. It's a short form video sharing social network, which allows the creation of 15-second videos on any topic, and videos can be combined to make longer content as well. It's disruptive. It's risen in popularity very, very quickly, and that surging popularity especially is in the Gen Z demographic, which we'd say is largely 13 to 18-year-old age range. However, it does stretch up a bit further than 18-year-old, but typically if you're aiming to Gen Z, TikTok's probably a really good bet for you. Advertising still in beta. So if you are wanting to advertise on TikTok, it's not as clear as it will be very shortly. However, it is possible to advertise on TikTok. Equally though, content does have to understand the format, and you can use trends tactically. I've seen very good examples of organizations and businesses engaging on TikTok, creating videos based on trends, understanding the format, and also commenting being something that's actually turning out to be quite important on TikTok in terms of creating engagement with brands and businesses. There's an example of some TikTok advertising. I still think that TikTok advertising is quite obvious, but the actual ad flare isn't massive. So in the bottom left there, you can see there's a tiny little thing that says ad just there. However, I'm typically seeing on TikTok brands' quality of video is so high in the sponsored post, it stands out quite immediately on the feed. So if you are considering sponsored TikTok advertising, you might want to think about how to make it blend more naturally with the platform's typical content. So LinkedIn's B2B, business to business, and it's a social media platform intended for professionals. So it's built on networking. Something it's particularly good for is recruitment, professional connections, relationship building, and also corporate news as well. Something that is really important on LinkedIn is the right tone. You need to remember it is a business channel, and communication will be far less whimsical. That's not to say you can't have posts that do have fun and are positive and are happy. Of course, that's acceptable, but you do need to think about whether they're appropriate and whether they would fit with the audience that you're intending them to fit with on LinkedIn. There's some example of LinkedIn advertising. So on the left, I've got a promoted LinkedIn post with a learn more call to action. Again, you'll see it's reasonably similar to the other call to action based posts we've had on the other social media. Another thing you can do in LinkedIn, though, are specific sponsored in-mail or messages that come straight to the inbox of targeted individuals. So that's one that came through to me about a B2B website personalization tool. It's a way of getting very kind of direct and quite intrusive advertising through social media. So if you think that that's going to be likely to get you specific clicks, or it's something that works with your business and works in your customer journey, then that's something you might want to consider as well. Some other notable social media platforms, I'm not going to go into as much detail with these, but they should be there to consider based on whether they're appropriate for your audience and your organization or not, include Pinterest, which is a lifestyle magazine and scrapbook style social media. It's the sort of thing that's really useful for lifestyle businesses or lifestyle organizations. I've heard it being very, very successful for interior design companies in the past, maybe household goods companies, anything that kind of fits in with that sort of like lifestyle aesthetic side of things. You've also got YouTube, which I wouldn't naturally call a social media platform. However, it is a media platform with an added social space. So it might be something to consider planning into your social media strategy as well. Got Snapchat, which is a transient ephemeral platform, I've said, but popular with younger demographics and younger generations. Advertising on Snapchat's a little bit trickier, and getting the tone right on Snapchat's a little bit trickier, but it's one that you might want to look into further if you're considering reaching younger audiences. And also WhatsApp. Now, WhatsApp is a social media of sort, but it's a chat app. So it's really good for businesses who want to be building relationships directly with customers and customer service. And quite a few times I've now used WhatsApp to get in touch with customer services of specific brands that I'm interacting with. I've got in touch with returns departments of companies through WhatsApp, and it's quite a good way of making those conversations quite personal and making it feel like you're really being listened to by the organization, because although it's probably just running through their central customer service hub, it does feel a little bit more one-on-one. So that's where you might want to consider WhatsApp too. Now, looking at the time, I don't think we've got time for this task specifically, but the task was going to be to have a think about rephrasing a specific social media post on different platforms. I can see we've only got 15 minutes left and I've got quite a few more slides to get through. So I'll just leave you to have a think about that just now, how a specific message could potentially be reshaped and rephrased to go out on different platforms in different ways. Again, thinking about things like audience, platform, intention, and the content itself. But we'll skip through that task just now and continue on. So now we're going to briefly talk about the dreaded algorithm. So most contents nowadays serve content based on algorithms, meaning that the most recent post is no longer always the first. You do slightly have to battle against an algorithm, especially if you're just setting up social media for the first time. Low follower accounts can lead to less performance in the algorithm. There's a couple of basic tips in terms of beating the algorithm. Firstly, using video on Facebook is likely to cut through algorithm problems. Facebook is trying to compete with YouTube as a media platform. So if you're a business, it'll naturally not give you as prominent a position in the algorithm for a text-based post because it wants you to pay for their paid advertising services to put your post in front of more people, even if it's your own followers. However, if you use video in that post, they'll still serve you like you're a normal person into somebody's timeline more regularly and more naturally, because it benefits them for your audience to be seeing more video, because it means that they're kind of engaging with more video on Facebook, which is good for their overall statistics and their overall business plan. Equally, using the new features of apps can help you get around algorithms. So for example, Reels on Instagram can be a really useful way of engaging with your audience and showing Instagram that you're invested in their app and in their form of social media. It's typically quite good to use all the features of apps as well. So if you're on Instagram, considering not just posts, but also stories and reels. Generating engagement is important too. So social media ranks posts based on how people interact with them. So if you're creating a post, have a think about ways that you could potentially blend in engagement. Maybe asking questions like, do you agree? Or is this something you've experienced? Or write your experiences of this below, or let us know how you feel about this. These kinds of engagement statements in your copy can help increase the number of comments, increase the number of likes and shares, which then tells that social media platform, this is something that generates positive engagement or engagement from audiences. So we'll serve this to more people, and we'll place this on more people's timeline at better times of the day. And also finally, and it's quite a straightforward point to help beat the algorithm, is actually just posting great content for the right audience and not just kind of perfunctory day-to-day content, actually thinking about what you're posting, making it good and posting it for the right people. That's likely to just naturally generate engagement and naturally create successful social media posts. So I'll quickly cover some social media tools you can use. So firstly, automatic schedulers, things like Hootsuite and Buffer, which allow you to pre-plan your posts, plan them in, and then these tools will post them for you at the right time on the right day. So you can say, do all of your planned content, that 80 in the 80-20 split, on one day in the month, and just leave it to post. So you can do all of your strategic thinking about social media all at once, which is quite useful. For graphics and picture editing, you don't necessarily have to be excellent at the Adobe suite and like brilliant on Photoshop. You can use tools like Canva that have some really nice kind of half-made templates that you can just bring in your corporate or organizational identity. You can use stock photography from things like Pexels or Pixabay to help enrich the posts that you put out. They've also got stock video now as well. For video editing, you can use free video editing software like DaVinci from Blackmagic, which is totally free to download and is as powerful as some of the professional top-end video editing suites. And also analytics tools as well. You can use the built-in analytics for the different social medias in addition to Google Analytics to see how you're getting on those different platforms too. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I'll get through the last bit quite quickly and give you a bit of time for some questions as well. So my last few sections were on measurement, because I think measurement is really important, and it's a bit that's kind of undervalued quite often when people are thinking about their social media. However, it helps you evaluate the effectiveness of what you've been doing and checking to see whether what you've been doing has actually been successful. We talk quite a lot in digital marketing about, I think it's, I can't remember the exact acronym, but it's essentially if you paid the same as you paid for social media to print out a number of leaflets and throw them off the roof of your building, would that generate more interest and more buzz than what you've spent on the social media advertising? And if the answer is yes, you've not been doing the social media advertising or the content planning very well. And that's something to consider when you're looking at your analytics. Has it actually generated positivity for you? Whether that's top level engagement or further down the funnel, actual physical conversions on a product or an event or a speaker, or something like that. You're actually the thing that you're intending people to really engage with. So we'll get through that a little bit quicker. Something that you should consider is KPIs. So these are key performance indicators. And these are the things that tell you whether you're performing well in certain social medias. So the specific social KPIs that you can have in different social medias, and we'll talk about those in a second. Something you should consider is a social media measurement plan. So this involves setting objectives, identifying goals, deciding what an appropriate conversion is in the context of your social media, setting targets for those KPIs, and then basically seeing whether or not that's successful. So having a quick think about measurement across the different channels. On Facebook, things like likes, comments, shares, clicks, and reach are all really important and things that you should potentially be gauging in terms of your success. The ones that are probably more important, though, are things like comments and shares, because likes, clicks, and reach are things that can go even if there's not, can go quite high, even if there's not been actual engagement with what you're doing. Continuing on, possible success indicators could be something like an increase in overall engagement, or more concretely, an increase in website visits from Facebook. You're actually creating more people coming through to your website from what you've been doing. So we've got some industry benchmarks that might be useful there. Above 1.1% engagement rate is good. There's average, and there's below average there too. So there's what Facebook Insights look like. Again, just so that we've got some time for questions, I won't go into that in too much detail. For Twitter, we've got favorites, retweets, and mentions. And again, there's some other things that you can have a look at in terms of engagement. Twitter counts engagement as any time somebody clicks anywhere on your tweet. That includes things like retweets, replies, follows, favorites, video watches, all of that kind of thing as well. So there's some possible success indicators, again, engagement, an increase in website clicks, and there's some benchmarks too. There's what Twitter analytics looks like. You can tell that I don't use my own Twitter very much, having earned 0 impressions over this 28-day period. It's quite a sad Twitter analytics, to be honest. I would hope that yours is far better than this, but that's where you'll see the graph that tells you how your interactions actually are. Instagram, again, you'll get different performance in terms of your analytics across your different things like interactions, profile views, overall reach. And stories, you've got specific metrics you can look at there too. And engagement itself is quite hard to quantify on Instagram. However, like with Twitter, you can sort of create engagement KPIs yourself by doing a calculation of average number of likes, and then you'll find the overall, divided by number of followers, you'll find your engagement rate there. And you should make sure, though, that the engagement isn't artificially manipulated, potentially by paid activity as well. So that's what Instagram Insights look like. There's quite a lot that you can see in Instagram Insights. So if you haven't bothered going into this before, it's definitely worth having a look around and seeing what kind of insights you can get from what you've been up to already, if you've already got a working Instagram that's up and running. And that brings us to a little bit of time for questions now as well. I'll just double check and see if there's anything. There we go. Nothing in the chat so far. So if you've got any questions at all, happy to try and help out in this. I think it's the last 5 minutes that we've got of today's session. Feel free to also ask me directly, or you can ask in the chat too.
So while people are answering their questions, just want to say a massive thank you, Josh. I think I've learned loads. I knew the dog would bark at some point.
Yeah.
I guess a question from me is, I think the concept of the content calendars is great. Where is a good place, you said, to look for inspiration? Where would you go to look for inspiration for that content? Should it all be very consistent? Well, you said consistency, but you know, should you have a variety of different things? Where would you get all that inspiration from?
Yeah, I mean, I would say a variety is certainly good. One thing that I think is always useful when you're planning content is looking at what your competitors are doing. And I'm not saying steal, I'm saying look at what your competitors are doing. See if it's working or not as well, and see the sorts of things that they're getting really high numbers on. Are the things that they're getting high numbers on things like quite personal posts about staff members in their office? Or are they getting better engagement on new product launches? And consider building some of those things into your content calendar. So a little bit of competitor research there. Equally, doing a little bit of research about your industry and what's standard in your industry too. So if things like white papers are a big thing in your industry, potentially building that into your content and talking about that in your social media is something you might want to do as well. And on top of that, you can just get kind of general inspiration from other things that you see just on a day-to-day basis on your personal social medias as well. So having a look around, anything that you really like, have a think about why you like it and how you can maybe repurpose that maybe for your specific audience too. So think about it through competitor perspective, audience perspective, industry perspective, and then just generally any good ideas or good inspiration you get from things you see along the way as well.
Thanks, Josh. That's ace. We've had a question here from Bukola. How can SMEs grow followers?
Yeah, so growing followers is one that's, there's a few, I guess, quite hacky ways to grow followers. One way is by following lots of people. You'll often then get follows back from those follows, and then you can unfollow afterwards. I personally don't like that method that much because it feels a little bit unnatural. The way that I prefer building follower base is through engagement. So engagement with other people tends to create followers. That's, for example, commenting on other people's posts as a business, as an SME, is quite powerful. Liking other people's posts and liking them quite regularly is quite powerful as well. And also making sure that you are actually using the platform is really important. So when I've managed social media accounts in the past, I've always found that if I've got a story, I'm more likely to pick up followers because you've got the little colored band around your profile, which suggests you're engaged and you're online and you're an account that's up and running and working, and it makes you more appealing to follow. And equally, you're then more likely to be served up onto feeds and onto kind of suggested feeds if you're a regular poster. So that's a couple of tips in terms of followers. The other one, and again, it's something I mentioned a few times, is just creating really good content. And creating good content gets good results, and the higher results are, the more likely you are to build followers. The algorithm will make a difference here too. And there is kind of a point of critical mass when it comes to followers, that once you hit that point, you will just get followers and they'll just naturally build because your account's that big. It'll then start to be recommended in different places and you'll be appearing more consistently and getting more consistent engagement as well.
Excellent. I mean, maybe I have time for one more. So Anwar's asking about the balance between there's a company account on LinkedIn and a personal account on LinkedIn, and which one is best to post with? How do I decide to post with a company or with the personal?
Yeah, that's a difficult one, and it's one that I've actually also had to deal with in a previous role that I've had as well, where the director of the organization was kind of the account that we used for all of our company communication, rather than the company account, which had some pitiful number of followers and would just occasionally present here's something that's happening with one like, whereas his posts would get 52 likes and 7 comments. And I think if that works, that's absolutely fine. On LinkedIn, you do represent the organization that you work for. It's there kind of in your subtitle. It's not like on Facebook where the personal is very disconnected from the business. So I think on LinkedIn, you can kind of make the choice yourself. If you find that you're getting more traction as an individual, then I think playing it as an individual and just leaving your company account for the kind of more press release type statements or maybe recruitment type statements is absolutely fine.
Here we have it. Thank you so much. We're sort of out of time, but if anyone sticks around and Josh has a second, then I won't close the Zoom straight away. But just thank you for all of you who are watching along, and thank you to Josh. I'd be ashamed if I didn't plug that if you're interested in events like this, then follow at RGU Innovation on Instagram. It's our main channel. We do have a Twitter and a Facebook, but Instagram is where we're at. We have more events coming up. So if you are running a business and you don't already have a shareholders agreement, or you're not sure what your company structure should be, we have lecturers from the School of Law in our next skill session coming up, I think early October for that one. And we also have some more masterclasses and events going on. So head to our rgu.ac.uk/innovation. You'll get an email about it if you want to sign up for more. So thank you so much. Good luck with all of your projects and ventures. Thank you to Josh. And we will see you all very soon. Goodbye.
Thank you for coming along. Bye.